I thought I would give you a break from a PowerPoint presentation. So I apologise for... Oh, maybe it will disappear. No, it's disappeared here, but not here. And I thought I would talk and try and put things into a more practical perspective. We've heard some very interesting things this morning. I make no apology for the fact that I speak for right holders, basically, for publishers and authors. And so you will be getting my perspective, and I'm going to be drilling down into areas that affect published content. I'm not going to touch the audiovisual sector because I think they have different issues around portability, but portability is not such an issue in the world of publishing. And Victor will be talking later about music-related issues. So I'd just like to say that I think we've started... well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to Trinity. The only connection I have with Trinity is that my great-grandmother came here to receive her degree in the late 1890s. Although she took her degree at Cambridge, they were not equipped to actually hand them over to women at that time, so she had to come to Trinity to actually receive it. I think things have moved on quite a long way, and we're in a very different world today. So it's good that we finally do have clarity from both the European Commission and the European Parliament as to what they are really seeking to achieve through this digital single market initiative. And as Linda said, actually, there are no fireworks. We've seen a very balanced offering. The Commission wants to ensure access to a wide legal offer of legal content, ensuring that authors and right holders are better protected and fairly remunerated. And the Parliament, similarly, in its resolution this January, recognising the role of targeted copyright exceptions in contributing to economic growth, innovation, and creative and cultural diversity, said that copyright exceptions and limitations should be balanced, targeted, format neutral, and should only be based on demonstrated needs, and should be without prejudice to European cultural diversity, its funding, and importantly, fair compensation for authors. So there is a good balance here, and they also recognise the importance of ensuring that content is legally available so as to reduce copyright infringement, which the Parliament particularly stipulated was a serious threat to the functioning of an effective digital single market. So this is a balanced approach, I would suggest, which should be heartening for both users and right holders alike. And I'd just like to say up front that in my experience, and I've worked with all these people in my career, authors, songwriters, composers, music publishers, record labels, film producers, broadcasters, actually what they all want is for their content to be disseminated and to be used as widely as possible. They have no interest in locking it up. But equally, they do, for the most part, need to be compensated for that, for the use and enjoyment of what they create and what they produce. Creators want to be able to earn a living. Publishers and other producers, it's that compensation which enables them and incentivises them to invest in supporting creativity and innovation. So my aim today is to show the merits of licensing over exceptions and to suggest that Europe's goal can actually be largely achieved by adopting best practice licensing models from across member states before looking at any further expansion of exceptions, which, as Cedric has nobly, clearly shown, have caused immense complexity in themselves. So exceptions to copyright have historically been introduced as a last resort where there has been a market failure. So they have to satisfy the three-step test, which we've heard mention of already. There is a view that simply because of rapid advances in technology make it possible to do something more often, more quickly, download whatever content you want, share it with your million friends instantaneously, and that sort of changes consumer behaviour. There's a suggestion that access to content should simply be unleashed through copyright exceptions. But how can free access ever stimulate investment in innovation, creativity, and cultural diversity, the European goal? To take an analogy, let's say you've just bought your shiny new red Ferrari, an Italian brand of car, that can reach a speed of over 200 miles an hour, which they do. Even those drivers have to comply with the rules of the road because there are other people on the road, whether they're in cars, on motorbikes, on bicycles, whether they're pedestrians, they're all just as entitled to use the road. So just because it's possible to do something doesn't mean to say you have to be given an absolute free charter to do something which could be at other people's expense. We have to balance this. And as Cedric has demonstrated, exceptions they're very blunt instruments. They're cast in very, very broad terms. And once in place, they eliminate any possibility of developing a market. So they need to be used sparingly and access to content, and only where access to content which it really is in the public interest to have access to should they be used. And I think the legislators do seem to acknowledge this. So voluntary licensing has actually proved that it can be eminently flexible and tailored to any situation. There is no end to the flexibility that you can have in a license to suit a particular user's needs, whether it's around duration of the license, the territorial scope of the license. As David Kavanagh mentioned earlier, not everyone in Italy wants to hear everything that is broadcast in Ireland, and different markets apply. So there are lots of scope for flexibility in licensing. It has been suggested that copyright licensing in itself is very complex. Who do you go to? Where do you go to? What needs licensing? What is a license going to cost? So these are some of the issues that are being addressed by the Copyright Hub that we've been developing in the UK, which is intended to streamline and make licensing simpler. But really, that's for people who don't do licensing day in, day out. They're not doing major transactions. They're the long tail of individual private users, a lot of whom actually just want to do the right thing, but don't know how to begin. So the Copyright Hub is being developed to guide people and help people through it. So where there is a genuine public interest in guaranteeing access to content, as I would suggest there is in the case of education, we have a hybrid model in the UK of an exception if no license. And this has really served the interests of all stakeholders very well in the UK. It incentivises the right holders to offer licensed access. But if they fail to do that, there is an exception to fall back on which provides the access that educational institutions need. This was the model introduced as long ago as 1988, and it has evolved and adapted to digital use ever since. It is the basis of collective licensing for published content in the UK. So you can go to a single place, you can go to CLA for a license to cover all the content you need access to. And that's both for traditional analog uses, but also all digital uses. And I think this is a demonstration of how licensing can actually be made to make the law work in practice. Copyright law is perceived as complex. This is a way of satisfying the balanced scorecard and making sure that everyone on both sides has access. An example of how CLA licenses have evolved to address actually some of the cross-border issues that we've been hearing about is that CLA licenses allow online distance learning through a secure network, through a VLE. So a student enrolled in a UK university will still be able to access content they can get when they're at the university when they go abroad. For example, to take an Italian student possibly returning home for holidays who is registered with the UK university, they can carry on their studies without any difficulty at all through the VLE. And that's all available under the CLA licence. Furthermore, CLA has reciprocal agreements with licensing bodies all around Europe and around the world. So the UK content is available already quite easily through these collecting societies. So, and we've got the same model for recording broadcasts for educational use. And ERA, the Educational Recording Agency, has brought together broadcasters and all the right holders in the underlying works to license that use, to license schools and universities to be able to make those recordings. So, and to the extent, and it's only probably 1% of what what happens under a CLA license, we find about 1% of what is copied does not actually CLA does not have a mandate from the publishers to do that, because no one knew that the schools were going to copy and publishers haven't signed up to PLS. So what we're doing is applying for an extended collective license, another amendment to our law in 2014, to ensure that that 1% is also covered in CLA licenses. So there is absolutely no excuse now for not being able to get all the content that is needed. The model has generated revenue for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of right holders, being accessed by millions of students. And it's a very modest fee per student. I think it's just over £1 per school child per year, just to put it into perspective. What it does, it provides certainty of lawful access to the broadest range of content. So this works very well under the directive at the moment, under 5.2a, which Linda has mentioned, the right to copy, provided there is fair compensation. And it's supplemented by our fair dealing provision, which fits squarely under 5.3a of the directive, the exception for illustration for teaching. So we would be concerned that if there is to be any clarification, as the communication suggests, of this free exception, we want to ensure that it does not jeopardise a well-functioning licensing system, and that it does not fall foul, obviously, of the three-step test. My other practical issue that I'd like to address today is text and data mining, which has also been mentioned. TDM, for those of you not familiar with it, involves automated analysis of vast amounts of text and data to search for common expressions and patterns in the text and data. It's all done by machines, machine readable, saves researchers reading through vast tomes of academic journals. And the hope is that it will lead to making discoveries that will help to advance scientific and other research. Professor Ian Hargreaves, who promoted the most recent reforms in the UK copyright regime, heralded this as the route to finding the cure to malaria. So evidently it is a very important phenomenon and something that needs to be supported. I have to say publishers are wholly supportive of text and data mining, but it's not a copyright issue in my view. Researchers need to be able to access the text they're interested in, to put their crawler tools on it. It's a very technical process. So they have to be able to bring together the texts from a number of different publications, which may be published by numerous different publishers in different formats. It sounds like a nightmare. It involves finding everyone, negotiating, getting hold of the content, and then once you've got the content, if you're going to normalize it and put it all into XML format, then that's another additional cost. So it's begging for practical solutions. Another way of doing it is to go onto a publisher's platform, and you might want to do that with a large platform like Relics and their Science Direct database, and look at all their scholarly articles and do this process called screen scraping. But that destabilizes the platform and compromises access for other paid up users. So it's not, you can't just give people a free rein, because it is actually destabilizing what is available to everyone else. So there are a number of challenges. The proposed copyright exception, I accept, is looking just at public interest organisations and at providing lawful access for scientific and research purposes. But there is still there's a lot of devil in that detail. Public research organisations, you could argue a pharmaceutical company is doing work in the public interest, developing new drugs, but they're not doing it on a non-commercial basis. So should they pay for that access, that special access? Quite a different matter from a university researcher, for example, who is more than likely to be doing any research on a non-commercial basis, but still in the public interest. Where does science begin and end? The Oxford English Dictionary talks about science including a systematically organised body of knowledge on a particular subject, and gives the specific example of the science of criminology. That's another perspective on science, maybe. So all I would say is I'm very pleased to see in this wording that the word scientific is there. For some reason, it was in the proposed UK legislation, and that word was dropped at the last minute with no explanation. And so one wonders whether on Linda's assessment of our implementation of directives, whether the UK government has gone beyond 52A, I think, 53, whichever it is, in broadening it out to any research, so it goes well beyond the scientific research. So what are the solutions that the publishers have been working on? They have been working very hard on this, I can assure you. So one of them is working with Crossref to extend institutional licenses. That's the subscriptions with research organisations, university libraries, in order to allow direct access to their content for text and data mining by means of a simple click-through license. Crossref, for those of you who've not heard of it, holds the world's authoritative database of identifiers for scholarly articles. And it links straight through to its 4,000 plus publishers all over the world. So a researcher in a subscribing institution, that's a library, a research body that has lawful access through their subscriptions, can use a free Crossref metadata API to link their tools, their text and data mining tools, directly to the text they're interested on the publisher's site. So this gives them direct access without having to find those publishers themselves and negotiate individually. But equally, it does enable the publisher to see what's coming and manage that access, so that if they've got 10 researchers wanting to do something at the same time, they can manage that and ensure they do it sequentially rather than all at the same time, so as to destabilise the platform. Another solution we've got, which is perhaps relevant where researchers want access to something to which they don't currently have lawful access, is to use the clearinghouse that PLS, my organisation, has developed, because we have access to 3,300 publishers to whom we pay collective licensing revenue. So we can actually locate the publishers and put the researchers in touch with them, and that has been one of the biggest stumbling blocks that researchers complained of when we had our consultations with the IPO, and that's the complaint I heard from the researchers. So we developed the clearinghouse. And on the licensing side, the STM publishers, along with ALPS and the trade associations, have developed licensing clauses in all their licenses to allow text and data mining. And that goes back to 2012 and also was one of the big outcomes of the Licenses for Europe dialogue that's also been mentioned. So we've actually been monitoring at PLS what's been happening with text and data mining. And we did a survey last summer which showed that of the 111 publisher respondents, the large STM publishers, only 20 had received requests for text and data mining. Fewer than 100 requests were received across all of them over each of the last 3 years. That's 100 requests per year from all the researchers in the UK. And there was absolutely no discernible change following the introduction of the exception in the UK. 80% of those requests were for non-commercial research purposes. All but 6% of the requests were granted, and that was where publishers couldn't fulfill them for technical reasons. So the apparent lack of demand for text and data mining licenses is actually consistent with what publishers linked to the Crossref service have been telling me. They have seen absolutely no increase in text and data mining activity as a result of the Crossref service. There is no uptake in demand for text and data mining. So I think short of creating a single repository storing all published content from all over the world in a normalized format, it's very hard to see what an exception to copyright can actually achieve, how it is going to advance text and data mining. Publishers have already been developing, as I say, these appropriate and scalable licensing solutions. They're very keen to invest in the ideas of having repositories with enriched content. But the incentive for that investment will just vanish if there's an exception that's too wide. And in the meantime, actually the researchers do have the access that they need. So we can see that text and data mining is a very nascent market. It's still awaiting its demand. But if you bring in an exception, there can never be any market. So what I would conclude by saying is that what we need to do is foster an environment that is more favourable to licensing by adopting best practices that already exist across member states in licensing. I've mentioned a few in the UK. Encourage right holders to license their rights across borders wherever possible and according to local market conditions. Not everyone wants everything. Eliminate contract override provisions because actually they're inhibiting licensing rather than encouraging it. And support tools that help licensing, like the Copyright Hub. I would say a more nuanced solution than blunt copyright exceptions is what we need, and that is achievable only through licensing. And with that, we can have a better outcome for all the stakeholders and for the European economy. Thanks very much.